Good afternoon, everybody. That woke people up. It's good to hear a buzzing room. I think we're going to just wait for a few people to come in. But this is an amazing session. Great to see so many people here. And we will try and keep this as interactive and as firesidey as it needs to be. My name is Andy Mundy-Castle. I am a producer, director, executive producer, and run a company called Doc Arts. I'm also a board member of the Documentary Film Council. You may see some flyers on your chairs, this is, this is something that I've been excited by all week, knowing Joanna for a little while now. I know how brilliant she is, and I've always been amazed at how little shine you've had in the UK. But globally, it's so much shine. So I'd love to take a reading from the room just to know who we are with. We're one big warm family here, so just a show of hands. If you're starting out on your journey in documentaries, put your hands up. Cool. People in production, or enthusiasts of the genre. If you're an enthusiast or you're in production, show of hands. Okay, that's good. Established filmmakers. Come on, okay, yeah.
I can see some of you here not putting your hands up.
If you're representing a broadcaster or you've got money, come and see me.
Oh, you're in trouble now, Harriet.
Amazing, it's good to see some. I know someone else didn't put up their hands, but that's it. So look, it's really lovely to have everyone here. What did it take to turn truth into cinema? To take raw reality, conflict, hope, danger, and transform it into stories that not only move audiences, but move the world. Few people working in documentary today have done this with as much vision, impact, and integrity in the landscape of documentary as Joanna has done. From Virunga to the multi-award-winning White Helmets, The Edge of Democracy, to the Eternal Memories, Snow Leopard Sisters, The Dating Game, and the closing night film of Tribeca Yanuni, which I think some of you may have seen at the festival here too. Joanna has built a career on stories that matter, stories that push the boundaries of what documentaries can do, say, and change. Her work has earned her an Academy Award, global recognition, and more importantly, a reputation for fearless, ethical, and emotionally resonant stories. All of this while coming from a working class, from humble beginnings to an immigrant family. Not that should negate how far you travel in any given industry, but Joanna is living testament to a producer moving with purpose and intentionality. But this isn't just a spotlight on the awards and success. It's a deep dive into how you've got here, and I'd love this to be a very open and interactive session in which I will ask a few questions, but I will also be thrown to the audience ever so often, just so that we can have it a bit more fluid. I often, when I'm sitting in the crowd, I like to throw things in, and if I'm not doing it, I hope someone else can. But basically, you're Donald Trump's worst nightmare.
Can you do my eulogy? Because I think you do a really great job. Yes, and I'm going to put that on my tombstone. Thank you.
Amazing.
I will say firstly, thank you for inviting me to do this, and thank you all for spending a Saturday afternoon here instead of in the pub, where I would like to be. It's been a road, and actually that road started here at Sheffield.
We were just saying that maybe 20 odd years ago, I remember being a young,
it was only 2 years ago.
Only 2 years ago. Emerging filmmaker in this hall where we used to have the meat market, and there was loads of round tables, and you walked in and said, I recognise this place. But for you, there's been many years that, what does Sheffield do for you? What's this place represent in your body of work and kind of how you've traversed the industry?
To be honest, Sheffield represents something really fun and hopeful, because I used to come here as a young filmmaker, and from the early days of Tabitha being at Channel 4, if everyone remembers Tabitha Jackson, who went on to run Sundance. And I used to have the face sheet, and I'd see the commissioners, and I'd go around the bar at Mercury, and I'd be like, look, there's the commissioner over there, and can I go and speak to them? And I'd pluck up the courage and just go and get a card. so that I could communicate with them afterwards, and life felt simple. And there was an industry that somehow seemed to work. It was a long time ago, and feature docs in some ways, in the UK at least, were really at their height. You had Tabitha kind of following Peter Dale at Channel 4, and then you had Nick Fraser at Storyville, and those were the days, a feature doc here. So that's certainly changed quite a lot.
It's changed a hell of a lot. The landscape is completely different. I am going to just, one house rule, there is a QR code just there. If for whatever reason you want to ask a question through the Slido app, please do take a snap of that QR code, and I'll be referring to that ever so often. But I'm going to take it even further back, more so than Sheffield. How would you describe your upbringing, Joanna? Talk to me about the early days.
Yes, it's I was born to a mixed race family. My father's Indonesian Chinese, my mother is British, and they met in Indonesia and moved here in the 80s when my mum fell pregnant with me. And certainly, as you mentioned, we were not a wealthy family. I guess I was lucky to get some good schooling later on in life through kind of bursary scholarship places, but it was meagre beginnings, and all that goes with 1980s Britain in a mixed race family, which I'm sure you've experienced as well. It's there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of bigotry, and there are ceilings everywhere. I'm not sure that I necessarily thought about them at the time, and I certainly didn't set out to be a documentary filmmaker. But I guess my acknowledgement of what that would be and how to get there would come much, much later. I was just quite a studious kid. I grew up in Manchester, so also...
Not too far from here.
Not too far from here.
What do you feel it was for you about that upbringing that shaped what makes a very solid, astute producer today? Filmmaker.
Thank you. My mother was very ethically minded. Certainly Manchester, for those of you who haven't visited, is incredibly diverse. And she was a teacher, and she actually taught English as a foreign language. She was very kind of embedded in the community and community work, organising, politics. And so we would go to everything in the community in Manchester, every different kind of church, temple, gurdwara, mosque. We were invited everywhere, weddings, celebrations, the works, conferences, all the things. And so I guess my kind of, my centre has to have started there. And she was very good at teaching me about the world and about the inequalities of the world. So that was from a very young age.
Do you recall, I remember when people ask me what were the sort of early works that changed me or who I was inspired by, I always remember watching the work of Soraya Samora, John Akonfa, people that I was intentionally looking out for, and really helped me sort of shaped where I wanted to go with the films that I then went on to make. Who did that for you? What were the stories that, can you remember any early documentaries that you watched that you felt, this is an exciting area?
It's probably quite controversial to say it, but I would say I can think about that for movies, not for documentaries necessarily.
Ooh.
Sorry.
The answer's why you went to Hollywood.
Well, I think storytelling is storytelling, and I think my body of work is also, I really believe that you need to tell stories in that same way. I don't necessarily see the difference. I do love the phrase ecstatic truth. What does that tell about people in the world? How does that create that kind of radical empathy? How does it create connection? So there are movies, from as small as I can remember, even something like E.T. I think the first thing I saw in the cinema was actually Bambi. I mean, how devastating. So I think movies have the ability to move people, but I was not, as I said, there was not intentionality to become a filmmaker. I was much more interested in working into traditional human rights, law, social policy, those kind of things, and it wasn't until much later that I came into film.
So tell us about that. You obviously had an untraditional sort of entry into the film industry, London School of Economics and human rights. What was, it's interesting actually, you may not know this about me, but I was actually an immigration officer So that when I left university, that was the first 2 years of my life outside of university. I was an immigration officer, and I remember being so terrible at the job because I was turning far too many blind eyes to.
I was going to say, I bet you were really good at that.
I was terrible. Right. But I give that example because it was when the BBC came to make a documentary on my department.
How fascinating!
That I thought, right, this is a jumping off moment. What happened for you in terms of, and how did that lean into what you then go on to do? Because a lot of your work speaks to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of similarly, I had just finished at the LSE. I'd done Indian religions in my first degree and then was really kind of half a foot in the Foreign Office out of LSE. Somebody said to me, oh, my friend needs an intern for the summer. He's a filmmaker who's making a film for Nick Fraser at Storyville. And he just can't get his head around the UN system because, you know, if you're not from that world, you can't. Can you go and help him? So I did. And I realised very quickly he was interviewing, you know, the Secretary General of the UN and, you know, all these people that, you know, I would like to meet. And he was doing that within seconds of sending an email and, you know, somebody was like, yeah, sure, come over. And I sort of thought, hang on a minute, this is much more dynamic than writing white papers in the Foreign Office. And so I stayed and I became his assistant and then got poached and went on to make another film for Storyville with somebody else. And I was kind of hooked because this was what I would see as, you know, direct impact. It was direct politics. You could really distill down, you know, what you thought about something and explain it to a much bigger audience in a way that was totally digestible. And I was hooked. You know, the communication of film has always been the thing that I feel most passionate about, and that was pretty immediate with those docs.
And it's interesting because I think from that stage, the landscape, and you've mentioned Nick Fraser, Tabitha Jackson, there was very definitive homes for feature documentaries in the UK. America had also, you know, their platforms too. But that's drastically changed. So the Joanna that sits here now, if you were sort of at the beginning of your journey, what does that picture look like for you? Because, you know, does it feel like a more daunting space, or do you think there is another way of looking at the possibility?
I mean, look, I think it's a real shame because I will also say that era taught me a lot about journalism in film as well. You know, the Nick and Tabitha and the BBC and Channel 4 were always, you know, the bastion of fairness and good editorial policies. You learned to communicate in your films with proper journalistic backbone, right? And I don't think it's any secret here, it's certainly been the talk of the festival, that is not the case at the moment at the BBC. I mean, we've certainly seen certain films just this week be pulled from the BBC, you know, for certain reasons and go somewhere else. And I think that's a real shame because the BBC used to be the bastion of journalism. So that worries me a lot, you know, the death of kind of not only budgets, but serious editorial policy, bravery in filmmaking, that worries me a lot. I mean, I was lucky enough to be at the kind of rise of Netflix, and that's kind of where we went next.
I mean, do you think, I mean, you've mentioned them, and I was going to go on to this later, but because you have just mentioned Netflix, and a lot of your work has, what, you know, the early stuff was backed by them, and I'm sure you are still doing more with them now, but was that moment where many people felt galvanized by the industry? Do you think that the disruption was too fast, too much, too soon, or did it kind of give wings to the possibility of the genre?
I think it's really hard to say, isn't it? I think it's really, really hard to say, you know, was that the making of massive global feature doc, or was it the beginning of the end? I don't know. And I think there's an argument for both.
Yeah.
Certainly, you know, over the last decade, there have been some extraordinary films made, and with streamers and without streamers, and actually we're starting to see that there is a kind of a return now to films breaking through that are not with the streamers, not with those kind of budgets. But it's tough. I think what I do know is that we were probably much luckier than a filmmaker starting out today. I think if you started today at the age of 25, 26 here at Sheffield, opportunities are much smaller and the mountain's much higher to climb. And I worry about that. I really worry about what that means for our industry.
when you look at the industry, and I was surprised to hear that you haven't actually made a film for a British broadcaster in, what, the last decade? And that says something. That, for me, that is astonishing, that somebody of your calibre is, and you choose to reside in Britain and work from here. Is that out of choice? Do you feel that should they not be looking for you in the way they look for others? What?
I mean, we have, as I mentioned to you, we made one film called Evelyn with BBC Films, but BBC Films, not Storyville. And I think that's partly because of the kinds of filmmakers that I work with, often working in kind of quite big budgets. So I think that's one thing, and that's certainly not the broadcaster's fault. But the other, I would say, is that the public service broadcasters have got smaller in their remits, and I mean subject matter. They've kind of turned inwards as the streamers have taken the big international stories, or were doing, at least a couple of years ago. Some of the public service broadcasters have kind of turned inwards on their own country stories, and I make way fewer films about the UK than I do about elsewhere.
Yeah. I want to take it back just a little to when you were coming through your journey, and you mentioned some of those early experiences. Was there ever a moment where you thought, I've got to go back to human rights, I've got to go back and do something that I'm sure there was, because it's in your come up. In your come up, it's not the most lucrative of industries, or was it? Did it consistently be that thing that you thought, this is my North Star, I'm going to keep chasing?
No, I mean, money was never the objective, and I would suggest if anyone's thinking about a career in documentary for the money, think again. But no, that was never really the issue. But I've been reflecting a lot on what success looks like for a documentary filmmaker. Thinking about this talk and thinking that actually, if I really wanted to lay it out, at least for myself, but I would suggest for others as well, it would be a work-life balance, it would be sustainability, it would be creativity and freedom, and none of those include awards or massive checks or any of the above. So that's something again that I worry about for myself, even though I've been very lucky. But increasingly more and more so for the community, because I don't think that we exist on our own. I think we exist in an ecosystem together. Film is a team game, and if the ecosystem is unhealthy, then individually we're in trouble.
Yeah, it's a big topic, that, because I think that we have to be very transparent and say it is an extremely unhealthy place at the moment. Fewer homes, bigger budgets, not trusting the emerging filmmakers, like some of the people that you would have worked with. What do you, from the position you're in now as a company owner, as an exec producer, how are you facilitating the success of others? And I know you do that quite a lot, but I just want to kind of hear it from your position.
We try. We're very, very, very small as a company, and purposefully so. We keep ourselves very lean so that the sustainability element is possible. I prefer that. And we try to balance things. We try to take some big commissions that have healthy budgets, that pay well, and then we try to give back on others that are not so well resourced. But it's tough.
Was it always your intention to start a company? Because again, I fall right on money and creativity. So okay. I respect the fact we need money to facilitate our art. So, but I know that's not a view that's shared by everybody.
Yeah.
So for me, it was born out of necessity.
Yeah.
I kind of just needed to facilitate the things I wanted to do. But I'm keen to hear for you, did that become a hindrance to to the sort of vision that you might have had of what this career could offer, or?
No, I don't think so. It was registered for the normal reasons. You register a company and then sort of grew organically and has grown and shrunk over the years. For that nature, it's not. We're also not very good at promoting ourselves. We're not, we're not kind of noisy. I think most people think I work for Grain. But
I did for a long time.
yeah, lots of people do.
Yeah.
And that's because we're really bad at our own PR. I think it's an irony of a lot of people in communications. I think we're good at other people's PR and very bad at our own. But no, I kind of also, considering the work that we do and the filmmakers that we work with, I appreciate some ability to be low-key with the work that we do, because often we are dealing with highly sensitive political issues or filmmakers in places that are not necessarily totally safe, and so I think a level of discipline around that is also important.
Why the name Violet?
It was about the light spectrum and the light that you can't see. So again, very much being under the radar.
Interesting. Do we have any questions from the audience? I need at least one, otherwise I'm walking off the stage.
Don't leave me here, right?
One right at the back there.
I was going to shout. I'm really interested in, obviously, hi, I'm Zeb, I'm an editor. I was interested in the team around you in the work that you do, whether or not you think it's important to take a team with you and that helps with your success as well as the creativity that you feel and that you've grown together, or does there reach a point where you go, okay, I'm now here, so I have to work with specific editors or people around me, or take on newer people to give them that opportunity? Which way does that go?
That is a wildly good question.
Yes.
Thanks.
I think the answer is, that's a really good question.
That's a very good question. Made me think.
I think the answer is both, right? So, and I do both. I think there are, specifically, some people will know, but some people will not know her. Abigail, who I've worked with for over 13 years, is a producer at Violet Films, and we've worked on absolutely everything together, and we always will. We have very different skills, but they're very complementary, and so that has maintained and sustained itself. I've worked consistently and repeatedly with many, many DPs and editors as well, and sound people. Actually, the one thing I didn't realise until quite recently at Violet Films that we do, both in all the roles, is actually we really, really care about who we hire. But I mean everyone. So I'll talk to every production assistant on a 300 people crew, because I actually want to know the vibes of the person that's coming on set. And that is kind of crucial. So the repeat relationship thing, yes, I do that. But also, even when working with new people, I do want to know that they're not just there for a paycheck, that they are actually going to come with us, because I think we are so mission driven. We are probably a bit, as a company, a bit intense about our purpose, and that requires a little bit more than thinking I'm just here for a job. Often we're working with, people with very difficult things to tell us. We've worked for a long time on trust or trauma-informed consent, and it's really important then that everybody on the team and everybody on the set is also understanding what that means. Often we'll train people in particular things. If we're dealing with disability, like the entire team from top to bottom will get the same training. And so when you put in that much more work, I think, with the people that you work with, it's quite normal that you then work with them again. That said, I will also say, sometimes it's interesting to change. And I've had a very specific experience recently where transitioning from one role to another, actually working with the same team, has been more difficult, and I've actually had to shift something for myself. And that's been, that's about honesty and communications, but it's tricky.
Do you find that hard to deal with? Like when how do you process that when you are, I've had to sort of let some relationships go that were over time and had got to a place that I felt, right, we see eye to eye. Like as a business owner and as a producer, some people are just cold about it. Some people are, what goes through your mind when you're making that decision?
It's really, really hard, isn't it? It's really, really hard, because I don't think you or I are cold about it. The work is really important, and it is your work family. And this is genuinely a relationship business. So, I believe in clear communication, and I think it's also friendships and relationships can have a pause or a moment or some air, and you know that's absolutely okay. Each new film is a new nucleus, yeah. And you don't have to do everything with everyone every time. Yeah. It doesn't mean you're not going to do the next one with them or something else in the future.
Each new film is a new kiss. We will go to we'll go to a clip, the first clip, please, just to look at some of your work.
Le parc national de Virunga, c'est la vie de la communauté.
C'est dans cette entité-là où vous pouvez encore trouver les gorilles de montagne. C'est ça ma vie. Ils ont l'amour.
You think that we have a problem?
Companies are exploring for oil. I came here to cover the security situation.
I was sworn in to ensure that Virunga National Park's protected. Oil companies have a reputation for controversial ventures. All their efforts are focused on the national park.
In the past, it has brought a lot of violence here. Everyone wants their slice of the cake.
This isn't a war yet, but it could be soon.
Companies are playing with fire.
Fear has driven people out of these villages.
If we leave, we would lose everything.
The national park is the only hope this region has.
You must justify why you are on this earth.
Finalement, nous serons aussi jugés. Nous allons seulement croiser le bras quand le parc sera en train de disparaître.
Pourtant, notre souhait est que ce parc reste immortel.
I remember when I first watched Virunga, and it took me back to, again, that filmmaker that I was talking about, Sarai Simora, who made a film called Pride Freetown. And you know, those are the sorts of films that I grew up on and thought, but I love them, but I could never make them. You know, just because it just takes you to it takes you to a place which is dark, and many people would, you know, it's completely fearless. How did you get involved? How did that come to being? Because, yeah, it's fascinating.
I mean, I think it would be remiss of me to talk about any kind of success without a heavy mention of Doc Society. For those who don't know them, they used to be called BritDoc. A very strong organisation here in the UK that have been championing filmmakers for 20 years. And we mentioned, you know, they used to host their stuff in this room. Certainly, the late founder Jess Search and her partner Bede Finzi have been crucial to my career, to my journey, and I had run an impact campaign actually for a Channel 4 film about the terrible situation in Sri Lanka during the Civil War and the mass killings of Tamils in the north, and I had run quite a successful impact campaign for them. And they asked me to come back and speak at one of their conferences, and in the room was the filmmaker Orlando, who was making Virunga, who was, in his own words, quite out of his depth. And they kind of match-made us there and there. I think they understood that I had a natural bent to big geopolitical issues, and that he needed a producer. And so within 5 days I was in Congo.
First time in Congo?
Yes, first time in Africa in Congo.
Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And I say that because I remember I called you up earlier this year, and you're like, I'm just heading off to Congo. And I thought, Congo is one of those places that I've looked at in work and just thought it's such a hotbed of activity and geopolitics in a way that probably nowhere else in the world has. What was that like? And then I think one of the things we do as emerging filmmakers, you have that level of fearlessness. You still got it, clearly, because you're only out there a couple of months ago. But what was that feeling like? Did you think, God, what the frig am I doing? Or were you running to the fire?
It was amazing. It was absolutely incredible, and I definitely was. I was aware, but I was awake to it because I guess the human rights degree meant that I understood. I was either going to end up doing it this way or another way. So that's not so surprising. I have, been involved with Virunga National Park now for 12 years, and I'm still a trustee on the board, and hence me being out there. So it's a bit different now because I have a young son. So going this time, I was a bit more like, oh, should I be going? Should I be doing this? But actually going there was incredible because the amount of impact that park has made and the work, makes you realise, well, there's a lot of other things I waste time on and waste my life doing, and that's not one of them, and will never be.
Just to talk about the economics and the money of that, was that, as in its early days when you had just been put with Orlando, was that in a place that completely was, as what you would be doing now? Is it fully facilitated? So that for me is sort of the worry, the security of that, because I'd imagine going out there now, you're properly backed and looked after.
Yeah, I mean, security-wise, it's pretty similar. No amount of money can protect you from a war. Yeah. But no, what Virunga had at that point was not enough money, but an incredible group of fearless funders. And I think the other thing that's disappeared these days, there are a few left, but there are not very many foundations left, backing really fearless films, global films, and putting those funds together. Virunga didn't have that, so we didn't have much, but we had a group of funders that really understood it, including Doc Society, and Rebecca Lichtenfeld, for anyone who knows her, who's now at a different foundation, but was always just the most amazing funder. But that film was not successful in the beginning. It went to Tribeca. We were sleeping, I think, 3 to a room in the cheapest hotel in New York. It had blood stains on the walls. Jeez. I'm serious. And everybody sort of passed on it, and we couldn't get a sales agent. We couldn't get anyone to touch it. And off we went with our tail between our legs to Hot Docs, thinking, that's it, we've blown it. It's just never going to happen. And then we got a tap on the shoulder from Netflix, which was kind of life-changing.
Would you consider that your first big yes? Like the moment that you felt, okay, everything that I'm doing now is in some way validated?
I really loved the first impact campaign for No Fire Zone with Channel 4. And the reason I loved that was because I sort of relentlessly sent the film to Downing Street. And then I woke up one morning and David Cameron was on the news, and he was like, and he'd sent a tweet to the Sri Lankan president and said, I've just watched this film, No Fire Zone, and we needed to have a discussion about this. And I was like, yes!
It's a big win.
It was a big win. So that one I always remember really fondly. But yes, I guess in film terms, Virunga was a big moment.
Amazing. And you've obviously made several films with Orlando. What's the secret to, or what was your method to a good relationship with in that very delicate producer-director sort of dynamic? Because it can be difficult. It can throw up a lot of surprises, but when it works, it really works because you've proved that it's not a one-hit wonder. Yeah,
I mean, I guess I am. I'm quite a particular producer. I expect a real.
I know.
I expect a real level of intensity and parity, with the directors that I work with. I think if I get a sniff of disrespect for the producer role, I'm not your girl, because I do think that these films, take both. I don't think directors alone make amazing films. I just don't think it's possible. I think they can have vision, they can have all sorts of really important things, creativity, but if they're not backed by the strength of a team, and if that team is not respected by them, then it doesn't work. So I'm always very clear about that. That relationship with Orlando was there was a lot of equality there, and it was relatively, there's a lot of back and forth. We had those official titles, but I was always a very creative producer. And we were kind of in it together.
How, talk to me a bit more about that, if we go into that a bit more granularly, what does that look like? And I'm speaking, I suppose, for people who might be emerging producers thinking,
Right.
they want to sort of follow a similar path. When you are sort of faced with a director's vision, how are you making sure you're getting the best out of the project, the best out of their voice, and at what stages do you feel like you really kind of make yourself felt?
I mean, there are directors in the room you could ask that question to. I think I'm a terrible lawyer. So I think you probably know what I think, because it's written on my face before I say it. But I do think there's a lot to be encouraged in creativity. I also think I love working with directors that like to be challenged. I like working with people where you can call bullshit, or you can at least say, prove that to me, defend it. Because I think that back and forth makes ideas stronger as well. So I normally work with a director that just has a singular vision and you're just supposed to serve that vision. I'm not just an administrator of money. So I don't think anyone would pick to work with me if that was what they wanted. So it's very much more of an intellectual exercise, I hope a creative exercise, and one that I aim, at least, to hold that filmmaker in a space that both protects them and pushes them.
And I mean, we've just looked at Virunga there, but that's quite a massive story. Everyone knows Virunga, it's a big story. For people who have access to stories that are probably bigger than the ability for them to tell it, how do you go about winning that trust when you're kind of making sure that you say that Virunga was a bit of a journey and it obviously became something, but it didn't start as that, and winning the trust of backers and financiers and the impact partners. What do you do to do that?
I mean, that's a really great question as well, because I think because I've made quite a few films in conflict zones, I often get young filmmakers coming and sort of saying, well, I'm going to do this. And I have to say, my general response is, you and whose army? What resources, what experience, what right do you have to do this? Because you can do it as long as in 5 years you can look at yourself in the mirror if something goes wrong. And I really, really believe that, because there are so many things that can go wrong, and there's such an enormous amount of responsibility in making a film about anyone, frankly. But when you are doing it with the world's most vulnerable people in very vulnerable places, that responsibility to me is paramount. And nothing trumps that. No one's creativity, no one's vision, no one's opinion trumps that. And so that, I am happy to say, has got better and better in the industry. That's one thing that has improved. The idea of consent, the idea of collaboration, the idea of the people that we work with on screen, not just being this kind of passive participant to our lenses, but actually something we work out. And I'm completely unashamed to say that I work out what that objective and that success looks like for the people in the film. Otherwise, I don't make the film about them. Because actually, having a film made about you can be difficult, even when you want it, even when it's a good thing. So that's always been kind of top of the tree for me. And then, within that, of course, director's vision, etc. But that director must agree with me that that objective has primacy.
Yeah. Consent, duty of care, I know that's important to you. When has it become a real challenge? When has it been something that you... give us sort of the moment where you thought, God, this is really sort of putting me on the line of creativity, art, and actually my responsibility to the story and the contributors.
Well, we made a series for Netflix called Heart of Invictus, and
with Archewell,
with Harry and Meghan, and this was very high profile, a very big budget, and working with vets, with veterans all around the world. And I decided, and to their credit, I decided to do the whole thing with royal informed consent. And what that meant was every single person that we filmed did not sign a consent form until the end of that project. Now you can imagine the amount of money that was spent and the profile of this and what you're doing. If one or two of those people does not sign that consent form at the end, you've got problems. You've got real problems. But I was confident enough in my processes, in the team, in training that team. I think I'd explained enough to Netflix about why we needed to do that and the credibility of doing that they went with it, which is a big deal for a big broadcaster on a big budget. And I'm happy to say every single person in that series signed that consent form at the end of the 2-year process. But that's risky.
And that takes a lot of, given the standing you have the ability to do that later on in your journey. But I think for a lot of filmmakers, that can feel like the most devastating thing. I've had people that have worked for us who be like, they come back, we didn't actually get the release form signed, and it complicates a hell of a lot of editorial.
Right.
I often take the mind that, look, if this person really doesn't want their life out there, we have to honour that. But for a lot of people, that can be a devastating thing, and what is your view on that? What do you say to directors you might work with who are pushing for the story even when the story is pushing against?
Oh, I would never do that. I would never work with somebody that doesn't want their story told, so that would just be a no-go area for me. I think the risky thing is sometimes things change. Circumstances change, or situations change, or life moves on, and making a film takes quite a long time. So that piece is tricky. I have to be clear, I don't use full rolling informed consent in that way on every single film, because there are some stories that that's not necessary. If you're dealing with major trauma or very sensitive issues, I think it is necessary. Or, potential real world consequences, then I think it is necessary. But if you're sitting down with somebody that's telling a different story, a music doc or something, I don't feel the same way about it. Yeah. So I think it's about judgment, but a lot of the difficulties of that and a lot of the risks of it can be mitigated by really good communication.
And let's macro out for a second. When you make a lot of films that deal with hard-to-reach communities, sort of very delicate issues that might have global impact or a kind of global sense of ambition. But often those communities might not have had people telling their stories, and especially maybe not people that look like you in Orlando. Mm-hmm. How do you navigate that? When you are culturally going into someone's space and saying, right, I have to kind of take this story, but I have to kind of also honour the fact that there's a there's a kind of cultural perspective to protect. And I haven't seen Yanuni yet, but I'd imagine there's similar sort of terrain to navigate there as well. Talk to me about that. How do you, when you're a filmmaker that does not come from the community that you are depicting, what is your thought process? What's your approach?
I think the process is the same with whoever I'm talking to, making a film about, and that is about energetic exchange. If you literally sit down, whether you speak the language or not, and you make sure you have a brilliant translator, if you don't, you are literally laying this out. And I would say the one process I've always been through with every film I've ever made is trying to talk the contributor out of it. Actively trying to kick that tire as hard as I can myself, to be sure that they understand what could go wrong, to be sure that they understand what it means, if it goes well, if the spotlight is massive, that can also have an effect. Now, it's very difficult for a contributor halfway across the world to understand what Hollywood means or any of that, right? But what you can say is, what would you not want to happen locally? What could I not understand? What could be good about this? What could be bad? What could go wrong? And really go over it and over and over and over it and keep coming back to that question. And in that way, I think those problems just don't bubble up because, again, like I said, the communication is king.
And I'm asking that to you with the knowledge that most of your films have an impact campaign built around them that goes on beyond the film's life, which is, again, testament to your integrity. But talk to me about that. How important for you is it to kind of have that impact at the heart, that impact campaign adjacent or at the heart? I'm amazed to hear that you've been with Virunga for 12 years now, so just
I mean, I guess we used to kind of separate it in a real way. I think increasingly I work with film teams and filmmakers that have that bent, inside them. They're making the film for that impact, whoever they are and whatever the story is about. It's there to communicate something bigger. But yes, I also love films that don't have impact, but I primarily work on ones that do, and I think that's because we're in trouble as a species, and film is a really powerful method of resistance, especially now.
Before I throw to the audience, you say, you mentioned film, and I think documentary specifically has a very important role, and you also spoke about the sort of decline of good journalism. As a doc family, as a doc collective, what is that collective responsibility for you? What are we? How do we sort of stand up where journalists are falling, or where sort of truth needs to be held to account?
I mean, I think we're trying. I think we are trying, but it's very hard for me to ask this community to do anything when nobody is supporting this community. And it's already a community with the least resources. Except that, I will say the elephant in the room. The vast majority of documentary filmmakers have daddy as a lord, or they have some real serious generational wealth behind them. So what you find is actually many people that are making the hardest stories have the least. They're not the ones making the true crime. They're not the ones making the music docs, and they're trying to fight in a system that is essentially trying to crush them. That is something I worry about daily. I honestly worry, will we have a feature doc industry in 3 years? Because I genuinely can't tell you if we will or not.
That's quite devastating.
For political docs, yeah, I really think that's the case. If we have public service broadcasters who essentially, even collectively, cannot fund a single feature doc of any note, and if they are doing it, having such editorial issues to even broadcast them, and the streamers are moving further and further away from politics, then where is the home for these films? Where are the funders for these films? There are individuals, there are a few, but there are not enough.
What's it going to take to change that? This is a big global issue that I'm asking you, but I think you are definitely in a position where you've built your career on documentaries like that kind of address that. But it's when you think about it in those terms, it almost means that we do have to sort of turn to the fluff or turn to the crime. Or
No, I don't think we do. I think one, diversity is brilliant, as you displayed so beautifully. I think filmmakers need to learn to have two irons in the fire, and to focus on their own sustainability at the same time as political work. that is something. But two, the piece of hope that I have is that feature docs at their height were very, very popular and did very well for both the BBCs and the Netflixes of the world. And right now there's a vacuum for somebody to step into. These films have audiences, they are beloved. We found with the kind of Netflix rise that documentary was suddenly really cool, and people were getting their journalism and politics from these films. So all it takes is one streamer, just one, doesn't have to be a big one, to step forward again and say, let's put forward reasonable, sustainable budgets for these films. It doesn't have to be to the place where it suddenly got completely crazy, where films were starting to sell for like close to 20 million and having millions of dollars spent on awards campaigns, etc. We can go back to a place where actually the films are being bought for what they cost to make in a sustainable way, and you're buying 5, 10, 15, and the industry is much more normal again. I think that's what I would hope for, and what I would call on from both the broadcasters and the streamers.
Amazing. Do we have any questions from the audience from right there? Just in the middle here, please.
Hi. You talked a little bit about impact campaigns, and obviously things like Virunga and No Fly Zone you've had great success with. What advice do you have, though, for the freelance filmmakers who are often the ones closest to the subject, but once the attention's gone, the money's gone, the broadcaster's moved on, platforms moved on, we perhaps have far fewer resources to do anything about it. How do you make people care about making people care?
It's really hard.
It's depressing.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's really, really hard. And I think, what I would say is, with an impact campaign, I think the best piece of advice I could give you is to really work out what piece of it you want to achieve, right? So if we look at any given issue, it's really easy to go, but that means, but we could do this, and we could do this, and we can do this, and it's all related, and of course it is. The answer is it is. But if you're planning up front what the kind of tangible, measurable pieces of impact that you can physically achieve with the resources or lack thereof that you might have, then you actually give yourself a much bigger break, because you give yourself a tangible goal, right? And that is to say, it's not my fault I don't have £3 million for an impact campaign, right? It's not my fault that the industry's broken, but I can reach this number of people. I mean, I'll take a film like Evelyn, which, by the other films, measure is not necessarily that successful, but because it did eventually go onto Netflix for a very small fee. And at one point they said, well, the license is up, we're going to take it down. And I said, please don't, because we get, one message a month from somebody that says, you saved my life, or whatever, right? And that impact in numbers is much smaller in terms of, does that make sense? Yeah.
I think we had one more hand up, just there in the middle. Okay.
Thank you for sharing the invaluable insights and stories. I'm a filmmaker from Japan, but now working on the story of Myanmar or Burma, partly rooted in my arrest in the country 3 years ago. And then my question is, when you make a film of the people, as you mentioned, in an extremely vulnerable place, and the impact campaign is essential, of course, but if you are, as you said, like it will take 3 years, 4 years. It's gonna take long. Then when your protagonist or the people you are treating with is desperately needing the help right now, how do you balance, or how do you? Because if you pay to the contributor, or if you interfere with their journey, the story will be a bit tricky. If you make observational documentaries. Mm-hmm. So my question is, like, how do you, you've got this budget, you have to use this budget for your creativity, but when the person in front of you, need it, need their voices heard right now, how do you balance how do you deal with this dilemma is one question. And the second question, how do you evaluate the impact? How do you evaluate the outcome of impact campaigns, like policy change or fundraise, amount of fundraising? Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, in answer to your first question, I didn't quite hear actually what the subject matter was, but it perhaps doesn't matter in some ways. My answer would be, it's really, really important to understand that you are not the saviour of the people, right? It's really, really important, again, to understand the objective of why you're making that film. So if you're sitting down with somebody that really is in need of something, they have to be able to answer genuinely why you making this film is of benefit to them, right? So at this end of my career, we now go so far to do full psychological assessments to ensure that that person doesn't actually think, oh, this is going to bring me money, or this is going to do this for me, or you actually have to go in with statements and truths that might lose you the access, because if they do lose you the access, you never had it in the first place, right? So I cannot help you. This film may help, it may not. Here's what I think we can do. What do you think success looks like? What does that look like now? What does it look like in 5 years? What does it look like in 10? Right? Because then you can go and raise that money, and that money is genuinely for you to make that film. But if that person hoped that resource was coming their way, or in fact needs to go and focus on finding their own resource, then actually making it a film is not perhaps the best use of their time. Does that help?
Thank you. We've got one question on Slido here. Do you work with first-time feature filmmakers? And if yes, what's the best way to introduce a project to you?
I have worked with more than my fair share of first-time feature makers, yes. I will say my slate is groaning at the moment, so we're not actually taking on any new projects because we do have a lot with a lot of really amazing filmmakers. But you know, in general, I would say approaching a producer or a filmmaker that you want to work with is to be genuine and honest, and you know, to explain why you want to work with that producer. I've had many people come and say they want to work with me that don't know anything about my work. That never goes well.
But would there be a project? Because whilst your slate is groaning, someone could come along with that thing that may turn you.
That's why my slate is groaning, Andy.
Okay, there you go. So let's play the next clip then, please.
Brazilian democracy and I are almost the same age. I thought that in our 30s, we would both be standing on solid ground.
The first time voting in the historical election.
I was 19 when Lula got elected. I remember the excitement. It felt like a huge step in our democratic path. 20 million people leaving poverty. Unemployment reached the lowest number in history, and Brazil rises as a major player on the world stage.
The most popular politician on earth.
To succeed him, he chooses Dilma Rousseff, who becomes our first female president.
Todos nós seremos julgados pela história.
It felt like a change of symbols. But something in our social fabric started to change. The country divided into two parts. Endless wall. It ripped us apart. The party soon caught in a corruption scandal, the greatest investigation in the country's history.
O que vão pensar de nós?
Crimes include fraud, slavery, even homicide. One president impeached, another in prison. Our democracy is crumbling.
Essa raça sexista.
Estou cada dia mais vivo perante a opinião pública.
I fear our democracy was nothing but a short-lived dream.
Amazing. What makes, you know, a lot of your films do revolve around really strong characters and sort of a duality of ideas and a complexity of so many things. Like, what makes a story worth fighting for? What makes that, you know, what is the kind of the absolute must-have? Because I'm sure it feels, you know, I can see a strand. Mm-hmm. You know, what does it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm very interested in character-driven stories, you know, in verite, in real-life films, which is, I guess, in my mind, why I don't see that much difference between doc and fiction. You know, I'm not so much of a kind of essay film girl, if you like. And I've been lucky enough to meet some just absolutely extraordinary people that, you know, all you have to do is follow them around and stuff happens. But at the same time, I think, you know, it is about the kind of, I wouldn't even know how to say it, you know, filmmakers that have something, you know, as much as the films have strong characters in them, the filmmakers are strong characters. And the way that they see the world, the ones that I've worked with, you know, from Orlando to Petra to Wad to Violet to Richard, you know, these are people that see the world in a certain way and are delivering you that heart and that soul to you. You know, you're the same. It's so that to me is completely addictive.
And what has that done for you as a producer? Because obviously you've mentioned a few filmmakers and they get the shine. As a producer, is the recognition married with the kind of work that you put in? And I know this is a conversation that has happened a lot, but you know, I'm also in producing circles where it's a big bone of contention. How do you see it?
Honestly, I don't really mind. I quite like being behind the scenes, but I do. If I don't get the respect specifically from the director, that I mind. If I don't get the recognition from the industry, I don't care. I don't think it matters at all.
Let's talk about money and raising money and what the work that you actually really sort of excel at.
I'm actually not very good at raising money.
Well, that's interesting. Why? Because you raise a lot of it, or at least you have ways in which you kind of unlock that. And talk to me through your process over the years, like from the minute you walked in here, maybe 20 years ago, thinking you had the best idea and someone should give you all the money to, how do you approach raising finance?
Because I suppose I don't think about it as raising finance. If I'm really excited about a story or a pitch or what it can do in the world, then that's what you're going to get from me. And I don't really think about it as raising money. I think increasingly the funders that I talk to and the commissioners and whoever know that if I'm passionate about something, it's because I really see something there and that it can be something. And so, if success has meant anything, it's meant that kind of taste has been consistent. So I rarely think about it as raising money. I think about it as being, look, if you've got a really great idea and that idea has been, really challenged internally by the team, then actually this is a really cost-efficient way of changing the world.
Yeah.
Right? If you see it like that, it is the most cost-efficient way of changing the world. The amount of money that NGOs spend, or advocacy groups, etc. What we do, if we do it well, is faster, more effective, and cheaper than anything they can do.
But you're running a business, so how do you navigate that? Because I know how challenging it is to do the other work that I still love, but it's not the stuff that keeps the sort of North Star going, or us chasing the North Star. Like, how do you navigate, the need to follow that passion project, but also actually sustain the fact that you're running a business?
I guess we've been lucky that, that the taste in films overlaps with the bigger end of the industry, if you see what I mean. So, when these films are bought, we have been lucky enough to have success with big streamers. That means they do come with bigger budgets and bigger sale prices, and because we're very lean in between, that sustains us. That has been our business model, and it's worked for us. It means we're not so good at, not overworking. That's not so successful. Not so good at not doing all the jobs under the sun and having a bigger team. But in some ways, I'm not sorry about that either, because it means it keeps us all very humble. There is no job too big or too small for any team member at Violet, and and that's kind of all hands on deck, and that's how it should be, I think. So it kind of, I think it also keeps egos in check.
That's important.
Yeah.
I'm throwing to a question here because it led into that. Actually, this isn't working. 1 second. How many people are on your team? How do you set up a team? Do you have a managing director, a CFO, associate producer?
No.
How do you sustain the business? And were young people consider looking for a job in documentary that they got?
Okay, so the way that we look at any new film is as a new small business, right? So of course you have Violet Films, but each new film I approach it as a new small business. So the core team at Violet is really 3 of us, and has been for quite a while. It has gone up to kind of 12 and down and up and down and all sorts of things. When we were making something like, at one point we were making Invictus and Wild's second film at the same time, and so the team was 20 with 300 crew. But that's project specific, if you see what I mean. And those teams are, you know, people we do frequently collaborate with, but we wouldn't have that number of people in the office. We also are kind of quite lucky that we don't really develop that much. We either come across an idea and chase it relentlessly and do it, or a filmmaker will come to us with something that we can't say no to. We don't have a development team. We don't consistently do that. I think that is something that kind of creates a beast in and of itself. If you have a development team, you have to get commissions to pay the development team, and then that sort of grows a beast that needs to be fed. Yeah,
I know it very well.
Yeah. And we haven't had that problem. And so in some ways, you know, maybe we're not even a business. I don't really know. We certainly turn over. We've never been in debt. We've always self-sustained in a modest but genuinely sustainable way.
So that did that change when your obviously a bigger partner came on board with Violet Films? You now have underneath your logo MFF.
Right.
What happened in that part of the junction? Why was an external party why did that perk you in a different way?
Yeah, actually we've turned down multiple opportunities of external investment because we haven't needed it. We haven't wanted to kind of grow in this like relentless way, and so we have turned that down. The relationship with MFF was less about finance, although it was financially healthy, and more about genuinely spirit and collaboration. Marina Virunga in Brazil is the best known social impact company in Brazil, in South America in fact, backed by two really extraordinary humans who are kind of really focused on advocacy both within film and in other ways. And the CEO there I had worked with before on Edge of Democracy, and we'd really loved working together, and they were looking to expand their reach actually, and looking to do that by investing in companies that they believed in. And so it was kind of it was an offer too good to be true, and has been just something that is genuinely supporting of me, not just financially, but really spiritually, and it's been lovely.
Which is quite unusual for an investor to sort of say, here, fuel yourself and don't worry about what happens. Like, but you have landed on your feet there.
I'm aware, maybe waiting for the other shoe to drop, not sure, but they seem to be delightful.
Have you ever had to risk your own money in making something work, or what's your opinion on that? Because my first film, I think I stopped the first purchase of something big to kind of invest in my film, and I fortunately made some money back. But what do you do? And have you ever done that? What's your approach when you?
Yeah. I mean, any filmmaker that comes to me for advice, I always say really pompously, like, never put your own money in, like, it's the worst thing you can do. But of course I have done, and that's either been by just not getting paid at the end of the film. And you put it in kind, or even today I have put money into films. Of course, I don't recommend it. If the industry can't sustain you in your film, then either the idea isn't good enough, or the time just hasn't come. I really wouldn't put your own money into films, because there should be an alternative, right?
Yeah.
But yes, it happens, and if it happens, just be sure that you can lose it, because you can afford to lose it, because also this is not an industry that is where anything's guaranteed, even if the film is exceptionally good.
I know we're running out of time, so I'm sort of trying to focus where we go. And so for you then, how do you sort of, kind of, if you look at what's happening now with the industry, there's been a lot of doc casualties. Many people have gone out of business. And what does it look like now for us? What do we have to start thinking about? Do we have to start becoming a bit more entrepreneurial? You've kind of got to a place where you don't have to have development teams. You're probably not at the wheel in the same way someone else is. But what do we need to do in terms of that entrepreneurial sort of change to invigorate from within?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we have to keep asking for what we need. first and foremost. I think we have to keep loudly saying to these commissioners, you know, there is a space for these films, they are important, you know, we're going to prove it to you, and we have to keep fighting for budgets that are not insane, but that are reasonable, you know, in telling them what this costs, because even some of the institutional funders with grant money will cap certain parts of the budget that make making films actually, frankly, really unsustainable. And I would say it is a relationship business. You know, make friends, make mentors. I certainly wouldn't be here today without significant mentors and peers and colleagues. And so that's really important as well. You know, you're not an island, and be respectful of people's time, but ask for advice and ask for community, because I think that also helps. I think also be willing to do each other favours, right? In different areas. That's probably another way of sustainability, and diversify. Have another income if you can.
Yeah. Have a think of some final questions. I'm going to ask you about. I remember watching both you and Orlando get up on that stage, the Academy Awards. It's an epitome of many of, you know, if you're getting into the business, beyond impact, beyond sustainability, you are also thinking of recognition in some regard. What was that night like for you, and was it an ambition of yours to actually go down that path of saying, this is how I want to be recognised?
The answer is yes, it was the ambition, but no, it was not for our personal recognition. Part of the conversation of that upfront discussion with the White Helmets was, what is the problem here, and how can we be of use? Of course, we could not stop bombs raining on the White Helmets. There was nothing that we as filmmakers could do about that. But actually they were subject to the most insidious, you know, black communications campaign, and they said, you can help to rebalance that. You can put our story out in the world, even as they are killing us. And so how do you do that? You broadcast it on the biggest stage in the world. And so for them, that was the ambition. I don't think I knew how hard it would be to get there, or that we would win. But it certainly, you know, it was inherently successful for, you know, for what they wanted. In terms of the night, it was obviously exciting, but it was the end of a very, very difficult journey, which I think, you know, post that moment ended up in probably quite significant PTSD for me and perhaps others in the team. You know, I put the Oscar in the cupboard for at least 4 months and didn't look at it because it's painful. And I think that's quite normal for filmmakers making films about things where celebrating others' abject misery is a really complicated thing.
Interesting. So what was going on for you? Why did you put it on? I mean, I say that because my mum's on the mantelpiece. Not that I have an Oscar.
No, because it should be. You know, because it should be. You know, because I think your story was, you know, was painful but much more historical, right?
Yes,
this was something that was still happening to them. This was something that was still going on. It's very hard to feel pleased with yourself when all you've done is just tell the story of how awful life is for some other people.
We are coming to a close, but I do want to very briefly talk about this because it's quite a big shift in your practice at the moment. It feels like it might be the beginning of another chapter, and that's directing. You are in the process of... Are we allowed to share that?
Yes.
Okay. Too late. That shift, tell me, what's gone into that? When can we expect something, and how has that been for you?
It's been really fun. It's been really fun, and actually it's been, you know, just a kind of personal challenge to try and do something that maybe I'm not very good at. I really don't know. You know, I actually also think it's really important to challenge yourself and give yourself other opportunities. 2 stories came along that I really felt I was uniquely positioned for, and so I've gone for it. And you know, we'll watch this space. It might be terrible.
Amazing. I'm sure it won't be, because one of the things I was struck by was your grapple on editorial nous, and sort of just the questions you were asking when we worked together were really about how do we make this the absolute best thing it could be, and definitely kind of had an impact on there. We're going to take a few more final questions from the room before we wrap up, because we are just over time, but I want to give the ability to anyone who's got any burning questions to throw up now.
I want you to show your trailer.
We'll share it after this question. There's one right here.
This is a question for both of you. but I was just wondering what your younger self would be most proud of.
Oh.
Wholesome.
You first.
No, you go.
My younger self would be most proud of being in this room 20 years on from when I first came here looking for money. And looking for money in a way that I thought, why the hell aren't you giving me money? And it was really, I was not ready. I just was not ready. I was young, but thinking that, you know, this was the best story in the world, but I just wasn't ready for the moment. And I think that I would be proud of sticking it out.
I feel very proud to consistently have the trust of some of the world's best filmmakers. You know, that feels very good, and it feels like a huge responsibility to hold. You know, these people could go anywhere, and so that feels really special to me. Yeah.
There was one other one just there.
I just wanted to ask you, is there any story all over these years that you wanted really to make and there was never the chance to do?
Ooh.
Sounds like her slate is very full.
Yeah, some of the scripted stuff. You know, we also do a very small amount of scripted stuff, and there have been some beautiful projects that I've wanted to make that I thought would be really good, and you know, some of those have gone by the wayside. The industry can be cruel, especially on the scripted side.
Very, very. We are going to show just that last clip. I will pick up one last clip there, and
you should travel the world with this thing and just bear witness. People know me for select images, but my passion is observing the human condition and making art that has purpose.
Miss Anne Harriman's work captures protests like no other.
The images help people see they're not alone in being frustrated.
I do wonder about the difference I'm actually making. What do protest movements truly achieve if people are still demanding the same human rights?
What you're doing is to give one the opportunity to be able to see. The images will be here forever.
As a young boy, the images of apartheid South Africa showed me to my core, and then I went on a journey of understanding what it all meant.
You gotta tell the truth. Racial profiling still exists. What do you want?
It's gonna be the biggest protest ever. All this is part of the journey. People have a goodness in them. And that needs to be fed like a plant. This is the well. This is the bearing witness.
Yeah, very, very good. I didn't want to end on me, so we will. I know I'm getting chased off the stage now. I think we can take just two last questions because this is a collaborative session. Right, make them quick, please. Sorry.
I will try. As a first-time filmmaker, how do you know you've meet the right producer? Like, is there any advice on finding the right producer for your film or for your...
It's actually a really brilliant question because I think there are far fewer really brilliant producers than there are directors, which is also not something we talk about that much. I think, you know, really have a deep dive with them and take the time not only to make sure that they're listening to you, but that you're listening to them. What is their vision for this film? You know, the same process as with the contributor. What does success look like for you both? It's just like with a marriage, you know, how are you communicating? Are you actually on the same page? What are their triggers? You know, what do they not like? What's really going to make them mad? You know, how do they expect to work? These kind of questions are completely normal to ask somebody. Now, you know, if they have experience, great. If they don't, great. Also, never be afraid to call up somebody for a reference that's worked with them. And just be like, how was it to work with this person? And especially if it's someone you know, do you think they're a good fit for me? You know, I don't think if somebody did that, to me, I wouldn't be offended at all.
Just a quick question about trust. How do you build that trust? Is it just good communication, as you were saying?
Brutal honesty.
Yes. Yeah. The very final question, make it a good one, please. No pressure.
Hello. You talk about mentors. I wanted to ask you maybe briefly, because we don't have much time, but like how you would approach a mentor, what sort of, one thing is to briefly talk or have some kind of opinion, or you will engage in something more formal. Would you, like there were some times in your career that a mentorship in which shape change the game, let's say, or give you a different perspective, whatever you can explain around that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very, very lucky to have some really extraordinary mentors. I would say sometimes it just happens, and you can kind of feel that. But if you want to approach somebody that you don't know, I think respect is a big thing. I think it's often funny when someone approaches you and says, if you have time, guess what? They don't. Right? So just don't say that. They don't have time. If they're going to make time for you, that's a different thing. And be distinct and be specific. I would really like to ask you this question. Might we be able to get to that at some point? Or I'm looking for a mentor, your specific career really speaks to me. Could I have 30 minutes once a month? Right? Because that's really distinct, it's boundaried, it's defined, and it's much easier to say yes to. How would you prefer to do this? Would it be a phone call? Should it be ad hoc? Can I ask you questions over email? Right? Because for me, I'm very happy to just be like, let me answer that really quickly. But if someone's like, hey, can I buy you coffee when you have time? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It's a very good bit of advice, that. And we could talk forever and ever with you, Joanna. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you, Sheffield Docfest, for putting on this session. Joanna Natasegara. In the last few days of the festival. Oh, my knees.